For his entire high school and college career, Trevor Lawrence was a star. He was the golden boy with the golden arm, and when he was made the first overall pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, he became the man tasked with turning around a struggling Jacksonville Jaguars franchise. Unfortunately, things haven't exactly gone to plan, and whilst improvements have been made, the scary truth about Trevor Lawrence is now emerging, and it could spell long-term trouble for the Jags. But before we get on to that, we need to go back to well before Lawrence's turbulent time in Duval County, and even before he was tearing things up in college. This is that story. Trevor Lawrence was born in Knoxville, Tennessee on October 6, 1999. Early on in his childhood, his family moved to Cartersville, Georgia, and he very quickly became a star at Cartersville High School in both football and basketball. In his sophomore year in 2015, he became the starting quarterback, and it was clear to everyone that the school had something special on their hands. During his 3 years as the starter at Cartersville, Lawrence won 41 straight games under center, including lifting 2 state championships in one of the nation's most competitive states at the high school level. Dominating on one of the best teams in the nation, many considered Lawrence to not only be a 5-star recruit and the #1 high school QB prospect that year, but one of the very best in history. With a huge selection of programs to choose from, he ultimately decided to become a Clemson Tiger under head coach Dabo Swinney. In his freshman season as a Tiger, Lawrence quickly wrestled the starting job from Kelly Bryant and set about one of the most impressive freshman seasons in the history of college football. This Clemson team was undoubtedly a juggernaut, benefiting from the best defense in Division I, giving up just 13.1 points per game. But Lawrence was the star of the show, as the team tore apart most of the competition that year, with their new quarterback filling the hole left by Deshaun Watson, who had been drafted by the Texans in 2017. Lawrence's offense won by scorelines including 63-3, 56-35, and 77-16, en route to a perfect regular season and a comprehensive 42-10 hammering of Pitt in the conference championship game. This brought Clemson to the college football playoff as the #2 seed, and it was here that Lawrence proved that the hype was 100% justified. In the semifinal, he threw for 327 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions, as Clemson swatted aside Notre Dame 30-3. This set up a championship matchup against Nick Saban's eternal powerhouse, Alabama, making the 4th straight season that these two teams had met in the playoffs. Both teams went into the game 14-0, but it was the Crimson Tide, led by their own superstar quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, who were 5-point favorites for this one. Ultimately, though, the oddmakers had got it totally wrong, as Lawrence and his Tigers absolutely blew Alabama off the field. This was an Alabama defense that boasted 2 future NFL All-Pros, and Xavier McKinney and Patrick Surtain too in the secondary. But on that night at Levi Stadium, neither of them were able to deal with Trevor Lawrence. He threw for another 347 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 picks, as the Tigers iced the game with time to spare, winning by a final score of 44-16, the biggest loss of the Nick Saban era in Alabama. The fact that a freshman quarterback tore apart a team as good as that on the biggest stage of all was enough to make Lawrence the presumptive #1 pick for whenever he wished to declare for the NFL Draft. This was a position that he never relinquished at any point during the 2019 or 2020 seasons, as he and his Clemson teams continued to dominate. In 2019, Clemson looked well placed to repeat as national champions after another perfect 14-0 regular season, but they would run into another juggernaut in Joe Burrow's LSU. And in the Battle of the Tigers at the Louisiana Superdome, LSU would come out on top, 42-25, giving Lawrence the first loss in a Clemson uniform. Despite this loss, Lawrence's stock was barely affected, and during a COVID-affected 2020 season, he was arguably better than ever, finishing that season with 24 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, bringing his career totals at Clemson to 90 and 17 respectively. That season, however, would also end in playoff disappointment, as the Tigers fell to Ohio State in the college playoff semifinal. During the 2020 season, fans of the NFL's worst teams began to salivate over the prospect of Lawrence joining their team, which began the famous Tank for Trevor campaign, reminiscent of previous ones for Andrew Luck and Joe Burrow. Anyone who had watched him for those 3 seasons, or even just watched his highlight reel, could tell that we were looking at a special prospect that would transform even the worst franchise in football. Right? Well, the Jacksonville Jaguars certainly hope so. To the surprise of absolutely no one, Roger Goodell called Lawrence's name first on April 29, 2021, sending him to Jacksonville to be their savior. The fan base, starved of winning football, believed they were getting a 6'6" scoring machine, primed and ready to take them back to the promised land. Instead, they got a turnover machine who looked more like an undrafted free agent than the first overall pick. Lawrence led the league in interceptions with 17 and threw just 12 touchdowns, ending the year with a passer rating of 71.9, the third worst mark in the NFL, only behind Sam Darnold and Zach Wilson. He posted a miserable 3-14 record as a starter during that rookie campaign, which saw him endure 8 games without a single passing touchdown, and a low-light game against division rivals Tennessee, in which Lawrence tossed 4 interceptions in a 20-0 blowout loss. Far from being the offensive rookie of the year, which Jags fans were hoping for, the kid from Clemson was shaping up to be an all-time bust. The shambolic coaching efforts of Urban Meyer, who was fired halfway through the season, absolutely contributed to this dismal output from Lawrence. But after 1 year, it was evident that he was not quite the can't-miss prospect that he had been sold as during his college career. For the first time in his career, he was facing adversity and doubt, all whilst having the weight of a franchise and an expectant fan base on his shoulders. The pressure was on for 2022. Luckily, he would benefit from a fresh start under new head coach Doug Pederson for his all-important sophomore campaign. Pederson had been a Super Bowl champion as the Eagles head coach, and the Jaguars front office hoped that he would be the man to unlock the best of Lawrence. The decision appeared to pay off immediately, as Lawrence passed for 8 touchdowns and 2 interceptions over the first 4 games of the 2022 season, going 2-2 in the process. Then, despite faltering as a team to a 3-7 record, Lawrence's performances stayed strong. There were areas for improvement, of course, but signs of the Clemson quarterback were starting to emerge. He stayed hot through the second half of the season as well, only this time, there was something different happening in Duval County. The Jags were winning games. With Lawrence playing the best football of his young career, Jacksonville won 6 of their last 7 games. During the last 9 games, Lawrence threw 15 touchdowns and just 2 interceptions, with the very best of these performances coming in a thrilling 28-27 victory over Baltimore, when he threw for 321 yards and 3 touchdowns, including a game-winning score and a 2-point conversion with just 14 seconds left on the clock. Throughout this run, Lawrence looked calm and composed, appearing to be the package that the Jags expected him to be. He ended the year with a much-improved stat line of 4,113 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. To cap things off, the strong finish secured a surprising AFC South title, setting up a wild-card round clash with the Chargers. The matchup at TIAA Bank Stadium began horrendously for Lawrence, as he threw 4 picks in the first half alone. Not to be deterred, however, the sophomore quarterback, in his first taste of playoff action, rebounded brilliantly, leading the Jags on 4 straight touchdown drives, followed by a 10-play field goal drive to seal a stunning 31-30 victory. Jaguar fans were over the moon. They were celebrating their first playoff victory in 5 years, and Lawrence finally looked like he could be on track to joining the top tier of NFL quarterbacks. Unfortunately, a loss to the eventual champs Kansas City in the divisional round ended any dreams of a deeper playoff run. But there was still plenty to feel positive about, and the future was finally looking brighter in Jacksonville. The good vibes that enveloped the team over the second half of the 2022 season stuck around well into the 2023 campaign. Lawrence continued to play good football, and another playoff berth looked all but guaranteed as the team moved into December. A 24-21 victory over the division rival Houston Texans in Week 12 put the Jags in pole position for a second consecutive division title, and dreams of a Super Bowl were beginning to emerge. Unfortunately, those dreams quickly turned into nightmares as Lawrence and the Jags did the unthinkable. 7 interceptions over his last 5 games from Lawrence contributed to the Jags losing all 5 games, leading the Jags to slip to a 9-8 record. As this was happening, a late-season surge from C.J. Stroud helped the Texans pinch the division. Stroud was everything that Jacksonville had hoped Lawrence would be for them, winning Offensive Rookie of the Year and taking his team to the playoffs in year 1. Meanwhile, the former number 1 overall pick in his 3rd season in Jacksonville could not do enough to will his team to the playoffs in crunch time that 2023 season, and the penalty was having to watch the playoffs from home. Nevertheless, that didn't stop the Jaguars from committing to an offseason decision that lies at the heart of the challenges they're likely to face moving forward. On June 14, 2024, the Jacksonville Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence agreed on a 5-year, $275 million extension, cementing his position as the team's franchise quarterback for years to come. Having struggled through quarterback purgatory for so long, it wasn't a surprise to see the Jags front office act so quickly to sign their man. But with the middling results Lawrence had produced so far, the move was not free from criticism. The The fact of the matter is that paying Lawrence $55 million a year is the scary truth and going to be a serious obstacle to the team challenging for a Super Bowl in the near future. Quite simply, Lawrence is earning huge money, the joint second most in NFL per season, but hasn't shown often enough on the field that he's worth it. In 2024, the first season of his new contract, he completed just 60.6% of his passes for 2,042 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions, while going 2-8 as a starter. This takes his total tally to 69 touchdowns and 46 interceptions, whilst having an overall passer rating of just 85. Again, there are more than a few reasons to defend Lawrence's numbers, including the Urban Meyer debacle, and the fact that he played through injuries at points. But overall, he hasn't lived up to the huge expectations that were attached to him when he entered the league. As we know, paying even a great quarterback big bucks leads to problems across the roster, which further emphasizes the importance of being confident in your guy before you pay up. In Lawrence, the Jags are paying MVP money for a guy who hasn't come close to MVP standards. Can he get there? Perhaps, but he will struggle without the pieces around him, and those pieces aren't going to be easy to find with his contract weighing the team down. According to Pro Football Focus, the Jaguars' offensive line was the 23rd best in football in 2024, and we've just witnessed an offseason in which key pass catchers Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram have been shown the door. Thankfully, sophomore wide receiver Brian Thompson Jr. is a stud. But remember, this is a roster that went 4-13 in 2024 and hasn't added much this offseason. This is a rebuild, but with a big chunk of the salary cap reserved for someone who has so far been a middling quarterback. The Jaguars faithful have suffered more than most in the last few decades, and so far it appears that drafting Trevor Lawrence has yet to take them closer to the promised land. But what do you think about the Jaguars quarterback situation? Let us know in the comments.